You may notice something interesting when you begin looking at your life from the perspective of timelines rather than events. Most people believe a timeline is a sequence of moments stretching from a past toward a future. That view is useful for daily life because it helps organize experience into a story that feels coherent. Yet the Oversoul does not encounter a timeline in the same way an incarnated fragment does. What appears as a future from within the experience often appears as a landscape of possibilities from above it. A timeline is not simply a road that has already been built. It is a pattern of probabilities held together by resonance. Certain experiences naturally attract one another because they support similar forms of development. Certain meetings, challenges, and opportunities cluster together because they belong to related fields of growth. The Oversoul is not choosing isolated events. It is selecting developmental environments through which awareness may encounter itself. This changes the way many people think about destiny. Destiny is often imagined as a fixed script that cannot be altered. Others imagine complete freedom in which every outcome is equally available at every moment. Neither perspective fully captures what is occurring. The Oversoul works within structures of probability, where movement exists, but movement still follows patterns. Imagine standing above a valley filled with rivers. Each river eventually reaches the sea, yet each follows a different terrain. Some paths move through forest, some pass through mountains, some encounter long periods of stillness before accelerating again. The Oversoul is less concerned with the exact shape of every bend and more concerned with the developmental qualities carried by the river itself. You can often feel this mechanism operating in your own life before you understand it intellectually. There are moments that seem ordinary when they arrive. A conversation lasts only a few minutes. A decision feels small. A delay appears inconvenient. Yet years later, you discover that an entire sequence of experiences unfolded from that single point. What looked insignificant became structural. Most people only recognize these moments in hindsight. Looking backward creates the appearance that everything was obvious, yet it rarely feels obvious while it is happening. The reason is simple. Nodes rarely announce themselves. Their importance emerges from what grows around them rather than from what they look like in the moment they occur. This is why Oversoul navigation cannot be reduced to prediction. Many seek certainty because certainty appears safer than uncertainty. They want to know which choice is correct before making it. They want proof before movement. Yet development often occurs through participation rather than foreknowledge. The Oversoul is not always attempting to eliminate uncertainty. Sometimes uncertainty is the environment through which growth becomes possible. You may notice that some decisions carry unusual weight even when the external circumstances appear similar. Two opportunities may look nearly identical on the surface. Two relationships may seem equally significant. Two directions may offer comparable outcomes. Yet something deeper recognizes that one choice connects to a larger field of development than the other. This recognition is often misunderstood as intuition predicting the future. In many cases, something different is occurring. Resonance is identifying compatibility with a developmental stream. The feeling does not necessarily reveal what will happen. It reveals alignment with a particular field of experience. That distinction matters because alignment and prediction are not the same thing. When people hear the phrase soul agreement, they often imagine contracts written somewhere before incarnation. While that image can be useful symbolically, it can also become limiting. Agreements are not merely promises between individuals. They are intersections of developmental trajectories. They represent places where different streams of experience support one another's unfolding. This means an agreement is rarely about a single event. It is usually about a range of possibilities contained within a shared field. Two people may meet exactly as intended while expressing the agreement in very different ways. The purpose is not always the specific outcome. The purpose is often the developmental opportunity created by the meeting itself. You begin to see this when examining relationships that changed your life. Some remained for decades, others appeared briefly and disappeared. Yet both may have altered your trajectory. The duration of an experience does not necessarily reflect its significance. A short encounter can redirect an entire timeline, while a long experience may simply stabilize an existing one. This perspective also changes how pivot points are understood. Many assume a pivot point is a dramatic crossroads visible to everyone involved. Occasionally, it appears that way. More often, it does not. A pivot point is simply a location where multiple developmental streams become available simultaneously, and participation determines which stream gains momentum. The interesting part is that momentum itself becomes increasingly important as a timeline develops. Choices are rarely isolated. Each decision strengthens certain patterns while weakening others. Each repeated behavior reinforces a particular direction of movement. Over time, the path becomes easier to continue because resonance accumulates around it. This helps explain why major life changes often feel difficult at first. People assume resistance proves a choice is wrong. Sometimes the opposite is true. Existing momentum naturally supports continuation of the current trajectory. Shifting toward a different developmental stream may require temporary friction because an entirely different pattern is being strengthened. From the perspective of the Oversoul, this friction is not necessarily a problem. Development frequently occurs through recalibration. Timeline does not become meaningful because it is comfortable. It becomes meaningful because it provides experiences that reveal something previously unseen. Comfort may accompany that process, but comfort is not the mechanism driving it. You may also begin noticing that timelines are not selected solely through major decisions. Attention itself participates in navigation. What you repeatedly focus upon influences what becomes visible. What becomes visible influences what becomes available. What becomes available influences what becomes actionable. In this way, awareness participates in shaping experience long before any external choice is made. This is why two people can occupy similar circumstances while moving through entirely different developmental landscapes. The difference is not always external. Often, it begins with what each person is able to perceive. One notices opportunities that another overlooks. One recognizes significance where another sees coincidence. One responds to emerging possibilities while another continues following familiar patterns. The deeper implication is that timeline navigation is occurring continuously rather than occasionally. It is not reserved for rare spiritual moments or dramatic life events. It unfolds through countless interactions between attention, resonance, opportunity, and action. The Oversoul is not merely choosing where experience begins. It is participating in how fields of possibility continue unfolding through the incarnated perspective. And once that becomes visible, another question naturally emerges. If timelines are developmental environments rather than fixed futures, then what actually determines when a probability remains potential and when it becomes lived experience? The moment a probability becomes lived experience is not the moment it is created. Most probabilities exist long before they are entered. They remain present as available pathways, waiting for conditions that allow them to become active. This is why people often sense major changes approaching before any external evidence appears. Something has already begun moving beneath the visible layer of events. Many assume that timelines are chosen through singular decisions. In reality, major shifts are often preceded by hundreds of smaller alignments. Attention changes first. Priorities begin reorganizing. Old interests lose energy while new interests quietly gain momentum. The visible decisions arrive later, but by then much of the movement has already occurred. This is important because it changes how readiness is understood. Most people wait to feel completely prepared before stepping towards something new. Yet readiness rarely appears as certainty. More often, it appears as increasing compatibility with a possibility that once felt distant. The timeline becomes livable before it becomes obvious. You may notice this pattern in periods of personal transformation. At first, nothing seems different. Daily routines continue. Responsibilities remain the same. Yet your relationship to those experiences begins shifting. The world looks familiar while your interpretation of it slowly changes. And that shift creates conditions for entirely different outcomes. This is one reason two people can encounter the same opportunity and respond in completely different ways. The opportunity itself is not the determining factor. The determining factor is the state of resonance already present within each person. One individual sees possibility while another sees risk. One recognizes expansion while another notices inconvenience. The opportunity did not create the difference. The opportunity revealed the difference. It exposed the developmental environment already being cultivated beneath the surface. What appears to be a choice in the moment is often the visible expression of a pattern that has been forming for a long time. From the perspective of the Oversoul, this makes perfect sense. Development is rarely measured through isolated moments. It is measured through continuity. A single courageous action has value, but repeated movement in a particular direction carries greater significance. Consistency shapes trajectories. Trajectories shape timelines. This helps explain why certain patterns repeat throughout a lifetime. People often assume repetition means failure to learn a lesson. Sometimes that is true. Yet repetition can also indicate that a developmental theme remains active because it has not yet reached completion. The pattern returns because the underlying structure continues generating similar experiences. You can observe this in relationships, careers, creative pursuits, and even personal challenges. Different faces appear, different locations emerge, different circumstances surround the experience, yet something feels familiar beneath the changing details. The recurring theme reveals the deeper trajectory being explored. When viewed from this angle, repetition becomes information rather than punishment. It shows where energy is concentrating. It reveals which developmental currents remain active. Instead of asking why something keeps happening, a more useful question becomes what pattern is expressing itself through these different forms. That question often changes perception immediately. Instead of focusing on individual events, attention shifts towards structure. Instead of examining isolated outcomes, awareness begins observing recurring dynamics. This broader view allows a person to recognize movement that would otherwise remain invisible. The interesting consequence is that timelines become easier to understand when viewed through patterns rather than predictions. Prediction attempts to identify specific outcomes before they occur. Pattern recognition identifies developmental directions while remaining flexible about their expression. One seeks certainty, the other seeks understanding. This distinction matters because certainty is frequently unavailable. Understanding is usually available long before certainty arrives. You may not know exactly how a timeline will unfold. You may not know who will appear or when opportunities will emerge. Yet you can often recognize the direction of movement long before the details become visible. As this recognition develops, another shift begins occurring. Choices stop feeling like isolated forks in a road. They start appearing as responses to larger developmental currents. The question gradually changes from what future do I want to create to what trajectory am I already strengthening through the way I think, act, and perceive. That question reveals something many people overlook. Timelines are not only influenced by major decisions, they are influenced by identity. The way a person understands themselves determines what possibilities appear realistic. What appears realistic influences action. Action reinforces identity, creating a feedback loop that can persist for years. This is why profound timeline shifts often begin with changes in self perception rather than external circumstances. When identity expands, possibilities expand with it. Opportunities that once seemed impossible become approachable. Directions that previously felt inaccessible begin appearing within reach. The external world responds because perception itself has changed. Seen this way, timeline navigation is not merely about moving through reality. It is also about becoming someone capable of inhabiting different versions of reality. The future is not simply selected, it is entered through resonance, and resonance grows through the ongoing relationship between awareness, identity, action, and experience. Once that becomes visible, another layer begins emerging. If identity influences which timelines become accessible, then what determines how identity itself evolves across the larger journey of an oversoul? Identity evolves through accumulation, but not through accumulation in the way most people imagine. The Oversoul is not collecting achievements, titles, incarnations, or experiences as though it were filling a container. It is refining coherence. Every life contributes information, yet information alone does not create development. Development occurs when experience becomes integrated into a larger understanding of self. You can observe smaller versions of this process within a single lifetime. Many people have thousands of experiences they rarely think about. Those experiences occurred, but they did not necessarily transform anything. Other experiences may have lasted only a few moments and altered the direction of an entire life. The difference was never quantity, the difference was integration. This reveals an important mechanism behind oversoul development. What shapes identity is not merely what happens. What shapes identity is what becomes part of the enduring pattern. Some experiences pass through awareness and disappear. Others become foundational structures that influence perception for years, decades, or lifetimes. That distinction changes how timelines can be understood. The Oversoul is not simply exploring possibilities for the sake of exploration. It is exploring possibilities that reveal something meaningful about itself. Each pathway acts as a form of feedback. Every incarnation provides information about what remains fragmented, what has become coherent, and what still seeks expression. You may notice something similar whenever a major realization enters your life. At first, it appears to be a new thought. Later, you discover it is changing your decisions. Eventually, it begins changing your perception itself. The realization stops being something you know and becomes something you are. This is how identity evolves. It does not expand through intellectual accumulation, it expands through embodiment. The Oversoul is not transformed by observing possibilities from a distance. It is transformed by inhabiting them deeply enough that understanding becomes part of its structure. Seen from this perspective, timelines are not separate roads competing for importance. They are developmental environments. Each environment emphasizes certain qualities while minimizing others. One may strengthen resilience, another may strengthen compassion, another may reveal creativity, leadership, patience, responsibility, or wisdom through entirely different circumstances. Most people naturally focus on visible outcomes. They ask whether a timeline leads to success, failure, abundance, recognition, difficulty, or comfort. The Oversoul often evaluates different variables. It observes what qualities are being cultivated. It observes what capacities are emerging. It observes how identity reorganizes under different conditions. This creates a significant shift in perspective. Events that appear undesirable from a local viewpoint may still contain immense developmental value. That does not mean suffering is inherently necessary. It means growth is often occurring through mechanisms that are not immediately visible. The apparent outcome and the developmental outcome are not always the same thing. You may have experienced this yourself. Certain periods that felt disappointing while they were happening later revealed themselves as turning points. At the time, they appeared to be obstacles. Looking back, they became directional corrections. The event remained unchanged. yet its meaning transformed as understanding expanded. This transformation occurs because meaning is not fixed. Meaning develops through perspective. The Oversoul is constantly gathering broader perspective through multiple streams of experience. What appears isolated within one life may connect naturally to patterns extending far beyond a single incarnation. The wider the perspective becomes, the more coherent, seemingly unrelated experiences appear. This is why identity cannot be understood as a static construct. Identity is a living process. Every realization alters the framework through which future experiences are interpreted. Every interpretation influences future choices. Every choice strengthens certain developmental pathways while weakening others. The cycle continuously builds upon itself. Notice how this relates to timeline navigation. Earlier, it appeared that identity influences accessible timelines. Now another layer becomes visible. Accessible timelines also influence identity. The relationship moves in both directions. Identity shapes experience, while experience simultaneously reshapes identity. Once this reciprocal movement becomes visible, the process appears far less mechanical than many assume. There is no simple sequence where identity creates reality and reality merely responds. There is an ongoing dialogue between awareness and experience. Each influences the other continuously. Development emerges from their interaction rather than from either side alone. This explains why major evolutionary periods often feel unstable. Old identities no longer explain present experience. New identities have not fully formed. Familiar patterns lose their authority while new patterns remain incomplete. During these transitions, people often assume they are lost when they are actually reorganizing. The Oversoul experiences similar dynamics across larger scales. Development does not move through perfectly straight lines. It moves through cycles of exploration, integration, expansion, and reorganization. Each cycle creates greater coherence, yet each cycle also reveals new territory that has not yet been explored. Completion continuously generates new beginnings. You may notice something interesting when you begin observing life through this lens. Certain questions start losing importance. Questions like, why did this happen to me, often give way to different questions. Questions such as what is being developed here or what pattern is becoming visible begin carrying greater value. The focus gradually shifts from isolated events to developmental architecture. That architecture becomes easier to recognize when viewed across longer periods of time. A single layer may seem random. A decade often reveals themes. Multiple decades reveal trajectories. What first appeared chaotic begins displaying remarkable continuity. Threads emerge that were invisible while living through individual moments. This continuity does not eliminate free will. In many ways, it highlights it. Free will exists within the ongoing interaction between identity and possibility. Each moment contains multiple potential responses. Each response strengthens certain trajectories. Over time, those trajectories become increasingly significant because repetition transforms possibility into probability. Understanding this changes how choices are viewed. Decisions are no longer measured solely by immediate consequences. They are also measured by what they reinforce. Every action teaches identity something about itself. Every repeated action teaches it more deeply. Eventually, patterns become pathways, and pathways become realities that feel natural. The Oversoul therefore navigates timelines through more than destination. It navigates through resonance, development, integration, and coherence. It is not merely moving toward experiences. It is becoming through experiences. Every incarnation contributes to that process, not as an isolated chapter, but as part of a larger continuity that remains alive beneath the surface of every life. When this becomes visible, timeline navigation stops appearing as a search for the correct future. It begins appearing as participation in an ongoing developmental journey. The future remains important, yet it is no longer the only focus. The evolution of identity becomes equally significant because identity determines how every future is ultimately experienced. And once identity itself is seen as a living expression of a much larger continuity, another question naturally begins to emerge. If timelines shape identity, and identity shapes timelines, what role do agreements, relationships, and shared developmental intersections play within that larger movement of an oversoul?
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.